Good morning. This morning's reflection is about Pope St. John Paul II. And this is a book that we've actually had on our bookshelves since the year 2000, so it's been there for 20 years. And I don't know about you, but in recent days, we've been going through a lot of the older stuff in our house and discovering the books that we forgot to read, or the books that we didn't quite have time to read. We picked it up and it's like, oh yeah. And this was a perfect one for us to look at today. And just to explain what some of these other things are here, I have some props that I'd used in other reflections. And one of them is a globe. And this reminds me of the song God's about that is He's got the whole world in His hands. It reminds me of the Christ the King statue where we have Christ holding the globe with a cross on it. And it's to remind us that He's got the whole world on His hands. It's also a stress ball. You think I might have been stressing this recently? Yep. This is the miniature cross, crucifix that was being given out at St. Benedict's for Lent this year. It said, pick up your cross daily. And boy, howdy, have we been picking that up. And I have a candle lit because just as a candle in the darkness is what my faith is to me, that I hold to my faith and I hold to the light of Christ no matter what happens. And for many people, Pope St. John Paul II was the smiling guy that seemed to be there forever. And one of the things that he said was, I plead with you, never ever give up on hope, never doubt, never tire, and never become discouraged. Be not afraid. That phrase, be not afraid, is in the Bible over and over again. And this, it might be like, well, yeah, that's a nice platitude. Well, so what? But the so what is what he endured as a young man and how it formed who he became and what we can learn from it today. I wanted to open this up to just a few photos that we can look at. And the first is a photo of his parents. They were a very religious couple. They only had 2 sons that were, I think, 14 years apart. And this is a photo of young Carol with his older brother. And here is a photo of the future Pope at the age of 9 at his first communion. And his mother would have died just before this happened. So the family with the 2 boys lost their mother. And here is a photo of young Carol at the age of 12. He was serving as an altar server at this time. His older brother was a doctor. There was a smallpox epidemic, and his brother tended to his patients until he died of smallpox. So then young Carol was alone with his father, and they worked through things together. His father was very religious and prayed often. Carol had discerned that he wanted to become a priest and was at university and also and he was studying different things to become a priest. And one of the cool things that he did was he founded a theater group that when the Nazis tried to invaded Poland and took over culture, they were working with underground theater. And he worked tirelessly to preserve Polish culture, because if the culture, the literature, the arts are not destroyed, they can build up the hopes of a people. Now, when those Germans invaded Poland, young Carol and his father fled from Krakow, Poland, and they walked 120 miles, and they learned of the invasion of Poland, and they had to go back home. On that journey, there were times they had to flee into ditches because of the strafing Luftwaffe pilots above them shooting bullets. During the first year of the war, young Carol worked as a messenger for a restaurant so he could continue his education underground and work with that theater. He began studying French, and then after that, he worked almost 4 years as a worker in a limestone quarry, and he could study at night. And he was still with his father at that time, and his father died of a heart attack during the war, so then he was alone. He eventually entered an underground seminary. And something else with this, the area where Carol grew up was one that had many Jewish people. He had many Jewish friends, and he had, of course, Polish friends. And throughout the war, he saw his friends disappear. He knew he had friends dying, and it was a very, very difficult time in many, many different respects. And he eventually ended up in an underground seminary and sought sanctuary. There are miraculous things that happened where he was fortunate in that he had many narrow escapes. So this young, intense man that you see here, if you think about this, when he did become a priest, and he then later went to Rome and studied, and returned to Poland, became a bishop, and stood for the Polish people. Think about this man who had lost his brother, his mother, his father, many friends. And he would have had many different dark nights of the soul. So when he says, don't give up on hope, hold to that for us today, and hold to what that means. And we then see him later. This is a great coffee table book with photos of the Pope throughout history. And here is one of his walking on a mountaintop. And no matter what happens, just remember, be not afraid. And even in our movies, we hear a lot about hope. In the Hunger Games, they said that the biggest weapon that Katniss Everdeen had was that she gave the people hope. In the Star Wars series, we had the title of one of the films, A New Hope. That hope can keep us afloat, no pun intended. And my hope is in the Lord. My hope is in all of us, that we work together to find an end to this, and we not only keep our hope, but do not become discouraged. And I hope that this has been a great light and a message to just keep going and keep the faith. So remember again, use your head. Keep the faith. And do the best you can today.